Before we start the tour, I would like to give a very brief introduction. There are three slave castles in Ghana, and these are Elmina Castle, Usu Castle, and Hippo's Castle. Elmina Castle was built by the Portuguese in 1482. It is the largest and the oldest castle. Elmina Castle is currently 540 years old. Usu Castle is located in Accra. It is also known as the Christian Castle, built by the Dutch in 1661 or 1662, and this is Cape Coast Slave Castle. Cape Coast Slave Castle was established by the British in 1665. Date-wise, Cape Coast Castle is the youngest castle. This castle is currently 357 or 356 years old. But on this very site, the first Europeans to arrive here were the Portuguese. The Portuguese came here and built a lodge. We call that lodge Cabo Castle. Cabo Castle is interpreted in English as Short Cape. But the Portuguese left after many years, and the Swedish came and occupied this place and built a fort, not a castle. We call that fort Karolosborg. And that fort was built by the Swedish in 1653. But because of gold, there was a strong rivalry amongst the Europeans. All of them were trying to take money from the Africans. So when the Swedish were here, they were defeated by the Danish. And the Danish arrived in 1658. And around 1661, the Dutch took over the fort from the Danish. And finally, in the year 1664, the British ambushed the Dutch and seized the fort. It was the British who were the final occupants. They started developing the fort into a castle. That is why we normally give credit to the British that they built Cape Coast Castle around 1665. During the transatlantic slave trade, there were no organized geopolitical boundaries in Africa. There were no jurisdictions like we have today, like present-day Mali, Ghana, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Angola, South Africa. No, our ancestors didn't have that kind of geopolitical jurisdictions or boundaries. However, they had what we call the African empires, kingdoms, chiefdoms, and states. Now, these different jurisdictions in Africa were not speaking the same languages. Neither were they using the same constitution in governing their different states. Because of that, they didn't see themselves as a people, or there was no unity. But before the Europeans arrived, the Africans were already fighting against one another. But they were not fighting because they hated each other, but they were fighting over resources like gold, ivory, spices. And the Africans, on the other hand, were practicing what we call domestic servitude. There's a difference between servitude and slavery. The reason is because the Africans were not changing their own names or the names of their brothers and sisters. Neither were they keeping their brothers and sisters in dungeons. And they were not also taking other Africans outside the continent by themselves. But when the Europeans arrived, the Portuguese that came were not interested in taking the Africans to the Americas. They came because of gold. So they got to a place called Elmina. When the Portuguese got there, they named that part Elmina. Elmina means the land of gold or the mine. So the Portuguese eventually settled and built Elmina in 1482. Technically, Elmina Castle was not built for the transatlantic slave trade. That is why when you go to Elmina, you realize that the dungeons there are different than the dungeons here. These dungeons here are real slave dungeons. And the dungeons here were built from the beginning for the purposes of the transatlantic slave trade. But the dungeons in Elmina were built for trading purposes. Basically, the dungeons there were not dungeons, they were warehouses that were converted to dungeons after Christopher Columbus claimed he discovered Americas in 1492. Now, when that part of the world was discovered, the Europeans realized that they could cultivate sugar cane to produce sugar. So they wanted alternatives, they wanted cheap labors to produce such services for them. But before the Europeans came for West Africans, they were forcing the Native Americans there as cheap labors. But due to the fact that the Europeans introduced some diseases into the Americans that killed the Native Americans, there was a priest we call Bartolomeo de las Casas. He was preaching the gospel to the Native Americans in the Americas. He later realized that the Native Americans were dying. So he started protecting them against the Europeans. On the other hand, Bartholomew Las Casas recommended that the Europeans should rather come for West Africans in Africa. And that recommendation was the genesis of the transatlantic slave. The Europeans rushed to West Africa. Many of the Africans were brought here to these very dungeons were not only from Ghana. Some of them were captured or kidnapped from places like Mali, Burkina Faso. Imagine walking from Mali to Cape Coast. That was a very long journey. But before they brought them here, there's a place we call Asim Manson Slave Riverside. Before the Africans were brought here, that is where they took their last bath, to clean them there and walk them to these very slave dungeons. My wonderful families, it was at that very point that the Europeans laid their hands on millions of African people. Today I'm going to take you to the dungeons. There are two dungeons here, the male dungeon and the female slave dungeon. This is just a preamble. Any questions before we start the talk, please? But the floor that leads to the male dungeon is very slippery. You take your time. Your first step matters a lot. So take your time, you take a gentle step. Please come. Alright, so this is the male dungeon again, and the male dungeon has 5 cells. The first cell, we are in the second cell, third, fourth, and the fifth cell. In each one of them were 200 men. There were 200 men here, 200, 200, 200, 200. By 5 means there were 1,000 men. Please, it's very important your phone should be on silence, please, because of the talk. Let's come this way. Alright, so this place had 200 men. 200, 200, 200, 200, 200 by 5 means 1,000 men was the total sum of the Africans in the middle dungeon. These were the only source of light to for them. On top of the middle dungeon, the British slavers built a church. The name of the church has rashes on their bodies. There were many times when the African men in the middle dungeon even got blind because this place had no light. Let me put the light out so that you see how this place looks like. Okay, please come this way. Right, so male dungeon again. 200, 200, 200, 200, 200 by 5, 1,000 men. But kindly come closer, those behind you there. Please come this way. Now there's a hole right there. That hole is connected to the church on top of the male dungeon. Now the British will worship in the church, and the same people will stand right there and look at the African men in the male slave dungeon. That hole is connected to the church on top of the male slave dungeon. The church is an Anglican church, an English church. We call Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. What I'm about showing you short. Listen to me. So here's the last cell. You see there's a cell there, there's a small cell there. Now that small cell is where all the African men in the middle dungeon were left to die when he got blind, sick, and
the British soldiers would take their bodies and put them there. And after they died, they would dump their bodies in the ocean. Have you seen this thing before? This is a shrine. It is an altar. It is technically part of what is known as the African traditional spirituality. But this wasn't here when the African men were here. No, this was established here by the locals after slave trade stopped here. But there was a big tunnel, very huge tunnel. All the African men were not allowed to walk through where they came from. No. The British soldiers would chain them and force them to return to the door we call the door of no return. But this tunnel got sealed. It got sealed up in 1834 to officially mark the abolishment. Okay, that is how we can see the tunnel. But there are many flowers. The flowers were brought here by the visitors who come here for tours. They bring the flowers here in order to show respect to the Africans who died in the Ministry of Danger. But let's come this way. Let me show you something. Now, can you all see these bricks? Let's move. No, you can't. You see these bricks? You see there are many bricks. Now, the bricks are the original floor of the main dungeon. We were supposed to be seeing bricks. We were supposed to be standing on bricks. The bricks are the original floor. But because the African men were defecating, vomiting, eating, bleeding, dying, so their human waste and the kind of food that they're eating formed this dark floor that we are standing on. Wow. And it's covered all the original floor, which were bricks. That is why we cannot even spot bricks. This man, he was born here in Cape Coast in 1741. He's from here, he's Ghanaian. But 1, 2, 3 are for British officials. But the reason why this man was not a slave was because his father was working for the British in the castle. Because of that, when he was 11 years old, the British and the church on top of the mill dungeon took him to London to study theology. He studied theology at the University of Oxford. He was the first African to be ordained as an Anglican priest in London. He became a priest in the church on top of the mill dungeon. Philip Kwaku was the teacher of all the biracial children, or the mixed children in the castle. Born in 1741, died in 1816 at the age of 75 years old. Let me show you the other 3 graves right there, please. Now there are 3 graves, 1, 2, 3. But this grave is for the governor of the castle, one of the governors of the castle. His name is Captain George MacLean. MacLean was a governor from 1830 until 1844. Back in the mill dungeon, I made mention of a very big tunnel system. Captain George MacLean sealed that tunnel in 1834 to officially mark the abolishment. He was born in 1801. He died in 1847 at the age of 46. Malaria killed Captain George MacLean. And this grave is for MacLean's wife. Her name is Letitia Elizabeth London. She completed suicide after she found out that her husband, MacLean, was cheating on her with a black woman. But there are some historians who claim that it was the black woman or the black mistress of the husband who killed her. She died at the age of 36 in the bedroom of the governor. Now the 3rd grave is for an English soldier by the name C.B. Whitehead. He also died at the age of 38 in 1812. The cause of his death is not known to us. We do not know what killed C.B. Whitehead. Now the cannonballs you see there and the cannons were brought here by the British soldiers because of gold. The French, the Dutch, the Swedish, the Portuguese wanted to attack the English here. So they were using the cannonballs and the cannons to fight back whoever that was coming to seize the castle. Okay, so you lower your heads, you take your time. Please be very mindful of your heads. You come inside. Now, we call this cell the male punishment cell. There are no windows here. And where we just came from had three doors. The first door, there was a second door, and a third door. Back in the middle of the dungeon, I made mention of 1,000 men. There were many African men in a male slave dungeon who tried to fight back. All the African men who fought back were brought here. After they were brought here, the three doors were closed and locked. If there were 5 men who tried to fight back, we'll bring them here. If there were more than 10, we'll bring all of them here. All the three doors will be closed. The African men were brought here with chain and shackle. They were here without air, food, water, and light till they died. Nobody goes out alive. It's not possible. Once you come here, your destiny in your life ends here. Okay, back in the middle dungeon, I made mention of a very big tunnel system. This is the tunnel. It goes like this to the exit. The exit is right there. But this part of the tunnel is not the exit. This is just a security post for the British soldiers to stand with guns and torchlights and tell them, go. And the African men will keep going through to the door of no return. Okay, nobody goes here. You're not going in. It's deep. Let's go here. No one goes there. So we are in a tunnel system. This is how the tunnel system looks like. From where we are standing, we were supposed to be seeing the male dungeon, where we saw the shrine, the altar. Because the tunnel is blocked off, that is why we can see it. And the reason why the tunnel got blocked off was because the abolition occurred in England in 1807. It was supposed to be abolished here. Because some of the British traders were still coming secret, illegal. That is why the governor who was buried there, we call Captain George McLean, blocked off the tunnel. But the tunnel got sealed off later in 1834. But it was a door here, very small door, very tiny door. Size-wise, it was very small, like this. We call that door the door of no return. All the African men in the middle dungeon were brought through here and then through this door. Then they'll put them onto the ships and ship them onto the Americas. But this door of no return was sealed off. The reason why this door was sealed off was because the sea waves were very violent. Anytime the British soldiers brought the African men here, the sea waves interrupted. That was unsafe for them to lose focus because the African men, though, didn't have any weapons to fight back, but they were using the chains to strangle the British soldiers anytime they had the opportunities. But these got sealed off. After this got sealed off, we'll bring the African men there to the other door of no return, closer to the female slave dungeons. And that is where I am taking you to. Alright, so this is the female punishment cell, okay? Female punishment cell, the door of no return, female slave dungeons. There are 2 female slave dungeons. In each one of them were 250 women. Many of the African women got raped
Some women in the female dungeon fought back for the resistance. They resisted. All the African women who resisted in the female dungeons were brought in the cell to be punished. There was a door here to lock them up. The numbers of the African women in the female dungeons who were brought here to be punished was influenced by the numbers of the African women who fought back. If there were 15 of them or more than that, or less than that, we'll bring them here. But the only difference between the male punishment cell and the female punishment cell is this window. Now, the male punishment cell, we didn't see any windows because that place was a death sentence. But here, the women had access to food, air, light, and water for not more than 2 weeks or 14 days. Then after that, we'll bring them back to the female slave dungeons. Female dungeon, and the other female dungeon is opposite this one. In this one were 250, and the other one has 150. So there were 500 women. These were the only supplies in earth that the conditions were very bad. Many African women were pregnant because got raped. All the African women who were pregnant in the female dungeons were taken outside the castle and birth. The children to whom the African women gave birth to were mixed children, and they were the very ones who had names like Johns, Rose, Peters, Lance, Swans, like that. Yeah. Back in the middle of the dungeon, I made mention of a very large church, a very big church. The church was a school, but the school was meant only for biracial or mixed children. Mixed children were not slaves. Neither were they brought to the dungeons. No. They lived outside. There was a British community outside the castle. And that was only for mixed children or mixed West Africans and the British slaves. Some of the African women, after many years, were brought back to the dungeons to be shipped off to the Americas. But the most painful aspect of it all is that the African women were known as prostitutes. Okay, so this is the door we call the door of no return. But the original door of no return was a tiny door right here. Very small door. We call this door the door of no return because this was the final exit of all the African people. All the African men in the male dungeon came through the tunnel system, and the African women through the female slave dungeons. They were all in chains and shackles. They chained them and shackled them, and they were through this door. Now, after the African men and women were through this door, there was no place of return. That is why we call this door the door of no return. It is estimated that over 4 million Africans were taken through Cape Coast Castle's door of no return and never came back. Every year, over 70,000 Africans were transported in every year. Over 70,000 enslaved Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas from here. Now, this is what happened. The British sailors didn't bring the ships closer to the castle. They anchored them about 100 meters away from here. However, they'll bring small boats closer to the castle and force the Africans onto and transport them to the bigger ships. After all the Africans were successfully loaded onto the ships, the journey will just begin. The journey from here to the Americas is known as the Middle Passage. I personally, however, call that journey the journey of no return. Because the moment the Africans walk through this door or walk through the door of no return, they were totally disconnected from the African continent. They never came back. They had only two options: death or they survived to the Americans. But during the slave trade, the British had only 13 colonies in the US. The rest of the colonies belonged to some of the other Europeans, like the Spanish, Dutch, Russians, and others. And over 40% of the total population of the Africans who were forcibly transported were being transported by the Portuguese. Portuguese normally transported Africans to Brazil. That is why Brazil has a very large population of African people. Today we are going to walk through a door millions of our ancestors walked through and never came back to Africa. Listen. But the door of no return was the final exit of all the Africans. This staircase was the exit of the British. They walked up the stairs
whilst the Africans walk through the small door of no return, and it has an interpretation, masters enslave people. But look above your heads. Can you see the door of return? Now there's a difference between the door of return and the door of no return. The door of return is not part of the castle system, but the door of no return is part of the castle system. When this castle was built by the British in 1665, the original door of no return was a tiny door. But this door of return was not part of the system of the building features of the castle. This door of no return is a symbolic door, which was established in 1908 during a historical festival we call Panafest. But before the door of return had to be introduced, there were skeletons of two people that were brought back to Ghana. We call them Samuel Carson and Madame Crystal. Samuel Carson and Madame Crystal are descendants of enslaved people. Samuel Carson is from New York in the US, and Madame Crystal from Jamaica in the Caribbean. In the year 1998, their skeletons were removed from their graves and brought to Accra. From Accra, they brought them to another community we call Abanzi. From Abanzi, they brought their skeletons across the ocean through the door of return. This is a symbolic movement to tell all the Africans in the diaspora, like the Black Americans, the Black Brazilians, the Black Europeans, and the Caribbeans, that they can come back to where their ancestors were taken from. And the reason is because all the Africans who were forcibly transported could never come back to Africa. The significance of this door is to urge all the Africans in the diaspora to return to their roots. After the skeletons of Samuel Carson and Madame Crystal were brought back, they were reburied at a place called Asin Manson Slave Riverside. Your tour is not completed until you visit Asin Manson. Any questions, please? This place is called McLean's Hall. It was the meeting room of the castle. This is where the governor, the soldiers, and his subordinates, the governor's subordinates, will meet to have their meetings, monthly meetings, yearly meetings. But after slave trade was abolished, this became the court of justice. I don't know why they call it the court of justice. The floor is not original. It is not original. The doors are not original. The windows are not original. But the walls are original. These doors are original. And when Ghana was Gold Coast of West Africa, Cape Coast was the capital city. Accra became the capital city only in 1877. The majority of the British civilization began in Cape Coast. The schools, the churches began here. Let me show you the residence of the governor. This way, please. So this is the living room of the governor. The living room of the governor has 9 windows. 1, 2, 3, 9. And the bedroom of the governor has 5 windows. The bedroom of the governor is right here. This is the bedroom. And it has 5 windows. In totality, there are 14 windows for just one person. The air is fresh, the views are very beautiful, it's comfortable in here. But when you look through this window, look through that window at the far end across the ocean, you'll realize that there's another community.
Now, this was the church on top of the male slave dungeon. The name of the church is Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. But many years after the abolishment, we made the church a children's library. But this was a church. And right here is a very big hole. Please come closer. Now, this hole, back in the male dungeon, I did show you a very big hole where I said it's connected to the church. This is the hole. Okay. So that somebody doesn't fall. So you see that the British would worship in the church, okay, and they'll come right here. This is connected to the male dungeon. We'll stand right here and look at the African man in the male slave dungeon. Now this is the part that we all do not understand. Why was the church built on top of the African man in the male dungeon? For those of you who have been to Elgina Castle before, that's the same thing. The Portuguese that built Elgina Castle also built a church closer to the male slave dungeon. After the Dutch seized Elgina Castle from the Portuguese, they also built a church on top of the female slave dungeon. Now, this is the part that we all do not understand. Why was the church built in the slave castle? But my wonderful families, this is where I would like to end my presentation. Do not forget there are 3 castles in Ghana: Elgina Castle, Osu Castle, and Kepus Castle. Elgina Castle was established by the Portuguese in 1482. That was long before Kepus Castle and Osu Castle were built. Osu Castle was established by the Danish in 1661, and that's the second castle to be built. And this is Kepus Castle, the last one and the youngest castle. But Kepus Castle was built by the British in 1665. But this one, which is the youngest castle, is 357 or 358 years old. But slavery is still going in so many different ways. As a people, let's come together. Let's educate the next generation so we don't repeat the same mistakes. I do appreciate your cooperation. I thank you very much for your visit today, and I wish all of you travel blessings. Thank you very much. My name again, Tony Wade. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Thanks.